I learned the hard way that marriage vows mean nothing when greed takes hold. After decades of sacrifice, running our business books, building clients, managing finances, my ex-husband, Charles, dragged me to court and demanded my fortune. He called me a dried-up hag and claimed I contributed nothing. His lawyer smirked. The judge, his longtime friend, nodded like the verdict was already decided. But they underestimated me. I spent years in silence, gathering documents, signatures, and proof of everything I built. And when I finally spoke 5 simple words, the courtroom froze. The judge's face was drained of color. Charles went silent. I didn't need rage, I had the truth. My name is Evelyn Hawthorne, and at 61 years old, I never imagined I'd be handed a court summons by the very man I once vowed to love. When the envelope arrived, I initially assumed it was routine paperwork from our accountant. Instead, it was a demand for my fortune, the wealth I painstakingly built during our marriage while he took credit. I stood in my kitchen, hands trembling, reading the accusations. According to Charles, I contributed nothing, despite decades managing payroll, securing clients, and sacrificing my own career. Rage wasn't my first emotion, shock was. I realized divorce wasn't enough for him. He wanted to erase me. That summons wasn't an attack, it was a declaration of war. The first pretrial hearing made everything obvious. The judge greeted Charles with a warm handshake, reminiscing about golf games and mutual friends. Their familiarity didn't just raise suspicion, it confirmed fear. Every objection from Charles' lawyer was met with approval, every point from mine was dismissed with impatience. The judge's tone softened for Charles and sharpened for me. I wasn't being evaluated, I was being judged before evidence was heard. My attorney whispered reassurances, but I saw the smirk on Charles' face. He believed the verdict was predetermined. Bias wasn't subtle, it was blatant. And yet I stayed composed. Panic wouldn't save me. Strategy would. During the next session, Charles stood confidently, gesturing at me as though I were a stranger. He called me a dried-up hag, claiming I had ridden his coattails and contributed nothing but stress. Laughter echoed from his lawyer, even the judge smirked. The gallery murmured, some pitying, others entertained. I sat motionless, absorbing the humiliation. His insults weren't spontaneous, they were crafted to destroy credibility and dignity. He wanted the court to see me as irrelevant, weak, obsolete, but while he shouted, I watched. His arrogance wasn't power, it was evidence. Every word he spat was shaping the narrative I would dismantle. After recess, his lawyer approached mine with smug arrogance, whispering taunts about my supposed failure and uselessness. He joked that I would be lucky to walk away with a pension, let alone my fortune. His tone dripped with misogyny, age, gender, and stereotypes woven into every insult. I noticed how he relied on intimidation rather than facts. He assumed my silence was ignorance, not restraint. But unlike them, I didn't need theatrics, I needed the truth. Their mockery didn't weaken me. It clarified something they expected to win. And nothing is more dangerous than an opponent who underestimates you. When my attorney introduced financial records proving my contributions, emails, invoices, contracts, the judge dismissed them on technicalities. Irrelevant, he claimed, without even reading them. It was clear, the courtroom wasn't neutral turf. It was a stage set for Charles' victory. But suppressed evidence doesn't disappear, it becomes leverage. Each rejection strengthened my resolve. If the legal system favored him, I needed evidence so irrefutable that not even bias could bury it. At that moment, I realized silence wasn't surrender. It was timing. As accusations mounted, I didn't respond. I let them build their case, weaving lies and arrogance together. The courtroom began seeing contrast, his aggression versus my composure. Silence became strategy, forcing him to overconfidently reveal more than intended. He bragged about deals I supposedly had nothing to do with. Yet I knew the receipts, signatures, and contracts had my name on them. He assumed I had no defense. In truth, I was letting him hang himself with his own ego. That night, I spread documents across my dining table, proof of my involvement, emails confirming decisions only I authorized, and records showing shared assets registered under my name. I contacted past employees and clients willing to testify. I compiled everything meticulously. And more importantly, I identified one document, one undeniable signature that would change everything. 5 words would reveal fraud, expose bias, and dismantle his narrative. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth. And truth, presented at the right moment, holds power greater than any insult. She spent hours digging through dusty boxes in her attic, folders from decades earlier, account ledgers, payroll sheets, and client contracts she meticulously kept despite Charles insisting they were pointless clutter. Each document felt like a forgotten piece of armor. She found invoices bearing her handwriting, decisions she authorized, and letters from clients thanking her, not him. It wasn't just paper, it was proof. The deeper she searched, the clearer the pattern became. She hadn't been a passive spouse. She was the backbone of their success. The realization was bittersweet. Her past sacrifices, once unnoticed, now formed the foundation of her counterstrike. Her silence was ending on her terms. When she presented the documents to her attorney, his skepticism shifted into respect. He pored over each file, recognizing signatures and agreements Charles claimed solely as his achievements. With every page, the narrative changed. She wasn't a dependent wife, she was a partner. Her attorney developed a plan, not to overwhelm with volume, but to present select pieces that revealed fraud and collaboration. She listened carefully, absorbing legal strategies, realizing she had underestimated her own intelligence for years. The attorney's confidence fueled her determination. For the first time, she felt not like a victim, but a strategist preparing a legal retaliation grounded in truth. Among the documents, she found something unexpected: contracts Charles had concealed. They detailed consulting fees, asset transfers, and offshore accounts she never knew existed. More importantly, several contracts required co-signatures, and hers were missing. She realized he might have forged or manipulated documents to cut her out financially. The implications were severe. If proven, it wasn't merely deception, it was fraud. The buried contracts were more than leverage. They were a weapon capable of turning the courtroom against him. She made copies, secured originals, and began piecing together a timeline that exposed deceit far deeper than insults. Her records showed deposits traced directly to her personal accounts, payments she earned before marriage that later funded their startup. She had forgotten those early sacrifices, overshadowed by years of his ego. Bank statements revealed she wasn't merely supportive, she was the investor. Additionally, she located proof of forged signatures, contracts signed in her name while she was hospitalized years ago. That discovery turned her anger into resolve. This was no simple divorce dispute. This was financial entanglement built on fraud. She realized her 5 words could do more than defend her, they could expose crimes. She contacted former employees and clients who remembered her role. One recalled late-night meetings she led. Another described business deals she negotiated. Many were willing to testify after learning of Charles' accusations. Some feared backlash, but her attorney assured protection and formal statements. The witnesses weren't emotional allies, they were credible professionals. Their accounts confirmed her leadership and contribution. And more importantly, they highlighted inconsistencies in Charles' narrative. The more testimonies gathered, the more isolated his lies became. She no longer stood alone. She had a small army of truth. With evidence mounting, her attorney suggested pursuing fraud charges if necessary. They analyzed offshore transfers, sudden expense hikes, and concealed transactions. Red flags multiplied. The narrative shifted. Charles might not only lose the case, he might face financial investigation. The possibility didn't excite her, it sobered her. She didn't seek to destroy him out of spite, but she wouldn't shield him from consequences. Her fight wasn't revenge, it was justice. Finally, she refined her strategy. A single sentence backed by irrefutable proof. 5 words that would force the judge to acknowledge conflict of interest and expose misrepresentation. She rehearsed them not for drama, but precision. They were simple, powerful, and undeniable. They wouldn't need shouting. Whispered calmly, they would dismantle bias and arrogance. She didn't just prepare a defense, she prepared a reckoning. The courtroom buzzed with smug confidence, Charles leaning back, his lawyer flipping papers theatrically, the judge prepared to rule. She stood only when addressed, holding a single folder. Calmly, she delivered the 5 words that shattered the room. "Check the offshore accounts, Your Honor." Silence thundered. She handed over documents proving hidden funds, forged signatures, and unauthorized transfers, accounts Charles never disclosed. The judge's face drained as he recognized the legal implications: perjury, fraud, and concealment. For the first time, Charles' arrogance faltered. Those 5 words weren't emotional, they were strategic. They shifted the power dynamic instantly. She hadn't insulted, cried, or begged. She was exposed. As the evidence spread across the bench, the judge's fingers trembled. He had assumed this was a simple divorce dispute, not a financial scandal threatening legal consequences. His prior familiarity with Charles suddenly became problematic. If he continued supporting Charles, he risked appearing complicit or negligent. He cleared his throat, voice strained, and ordered a recess. The gallery watched his confidence collapse. His old friendship with Charles now looked suspicious. Her attorney requested the case be transferred due to bias, and the judge, pale and shaken, had no grounds to refuse. His attempted favoritism had backfired. Neutrality wasn't a courtesy anymore, it was survival. Court reporters caught every detail: the judge's reaction, the evidence folders, Charles' shock. Within hours, headlines spread across local media. Talk shows debated hidden offshore accounts, forged documents, and a wife who dismantled patriarchal arrogance with 5 words. Journalists requested interviews. Analysts dissected potential fraud charges. Social media branded her as the woman who outplayed a corrupt legal circle. The narrative shifted from bitter ex-wife to strategic whistleblower. She wasn't seeking fame, but attention amplified truth. The court of public opinion turned its spotlight, not on her humiliation, but on corruption. Charles unraveled. His confident posture collapsed into frantic whispering with his lawyer, who now looked less smug and more terrified. Documents he once hid now threatened his career, wealth, and reputation. He tried framing her actions as vindictive, but evidence spoke louder than accusations. Panic made him reckless, raising his voice, contradicting himself, and attempting to downplay offshore accounts as tax strategies. The judge's pale expression returned, realizing this went beyond a divorce, it was potential fraud. Charles wasn't fighting for wealth anymore. He was fighting to avoid investigation. Her lawyer moved swiftly, filing motions to audit joint accounts and demanding full financial disclosure. Previously dismissed evidence now became critical exhibits. Witnesses who once doubted her stepped forward more confidently. The judge ordered a forensic accountant to review the finances. The burden of proof shifted entirely, no longer on her to justify contribution, but on him to justify secrecy. She didn't celebrate, she stayed composed. Momentum wasn't revenge, it was balance. The truth she carried for decades was finally recognized by institutions designed to ignore women like her. Friends who once supported Charles began distancing themselves. Business partners refused calls. Acquaintances who mocked her during the trial suddenly acted sympathetic. She saw through the performative concern but understood the symbolism. Loyalty built on power collapses when power falters. Her own circle grew stronger, people who valued integrity rather than influence. She didn't chase alliances, she let sincerity reveal itself. Betrayal on one side, support on the other, both clarified who deserved space in her future. The more the truth unfolded, the more people rallied behind her. Women who had endured similar treatment reached out. Former employees validated her contributions. Community leaders praised her courage. She didn't win through anger, she won through evidence, composure, and timing. Public support didn't inflate her ego, it restored her dignity. She realized she wasn't merely fighting for her fortune. She was dismantling a narrative used to silence countless women. Her voice wasn't loud, but it echoed. The court appointed a forensic accountant to dissect every financial decision made during the marriage. What began as a divorce proceeding now resembled a criminal investigation. The audit traced money trails from offshore accounts to hidden investments and shell companies registered under aliases. She watched quietly as Charles' empire, once admired, unraveled under scrutiny. Every transfer he assumed would remain invisible now appeared on spreadsheets displayed before legal authorities. His lawyer, now visibly anxious, requested delays, but the judge denied them. The audit didn't just threaten asset division, it jeopardized his credibility, career, and public image. For years, he dismissed her as irrelevant. Now her documentation was the key evidence challenging his entire financial narrative. The auditor's report raised red flags too large to ignore. Missing declarations, forged signatures, and concealed income streams triggered legal alarms. Prosecutors began evaluating potential fraud charges, not just civil penalties. Charles' confidence deteriorated into panic as he realized the consequences extended beyond losing wealth. He faced the possibility of criminal accountability. She didn't gloat, she didn't need to. The system, once biased against her, now turned toward truth. His lawyer shifted the tone, no longer mocking her but appealing for leniency. Yet the facts were unforgiving. The man who once belittled her in open court now trembled at the mention of federal investigation. With mounting evidence, the court overturned preliminary decisions that favored Charles. The judge, now unable to ignore conflict of interest, recused himself, and a new judge resumed proceedings. This time, the law worked as intended. The settlement reversed dramatically. Instead of demanding her fortune, Charles now faced restitution for hidden funds and misappropriated assets. She reclaimed not only her contributions but recognition of them. The reversal wasn't born from sympathy, it was earned through truth. The shift demonstrated how fragile power built on lies becomes when the foundation is exposed. Family members once loyal to Charles grew divided. Some refused to believe he could commit fraud, others were stunned by undeniable evidence. Tension fractured gatherings, and whispered arguments replaced polite conversation. She watched with a heavy but steady heart, knowing betrayal affects more than two people. Her children faced an uncomfortable reality. Their father's pride had crossed into deception. She didn't pressure them. Instead, she allowed them to confront the truth at their own pace. The division hurt, but it clarified who valued honesty over allegiance. Painful, yes. Necessary, absolutely. The business community responded swiftly. Partners withdrew support, investors questioned legitimacy, and colleagues distanced themselves. The same people who praised his leadership now treated him as a liability. His lawyer's calls went unanswered. Social invitations vanished. Public perception turned. He wasn't a successful businessman fighting an unfair divorce. He was a man exposed for financial misconduct. The allies he relied on revealed their true nature. They admired power, not integrity. And without power, he stood alone. For years, she lived under the shadow of his arrogance. Now, the narrative is reversed. She wasn't seen as a dependent spouse or a bitter ex-wife. She was recognized as a strategic contributor who built their success. Her dignity, once dismissed, was restored publicly and legally. Community leaders praised her composure, and women saw her as a symbol of resilience and intelligence. She didn't seek applause, but after enduring humiliation, acknowledgement felt like justice. She reclaimed her name, her voice, and her identity. Recognizing the vulnerability of her estate and legacy, she met with financial and legal advisors. She restructured her will, ensuring transparency and protection. Trusts were created for grandchildren, charitable funds established, and safeguards implemented so no future partner could exploit her assets. The restructuring wasn't vengeance against Charles, it was wisdom gained through hardship. She chose security, autonomy, and legacy over fear. The past had tried to erase her worth. The future would preserve it. Hit like and subscribe right now, because the next chapter shows how truth reshapes everything, from family to legacy. With the audit complete and evidence undeniable, Charles faced a harsh reality. Prosecutors formally referred the case for potential fraud charges, and the divorce court suspended his access to marital assets until the investigation concluded. His business partners withdrew, fearing association with scandal. The man who once mocked her in open court now sat alone with trembling hands, realizing arrogance had become his downfall. He attempted to portray himself as a victim, but few believed him. She didn't celebrate his collapse, she recognized it as the natural consequence of deceit. Life had given him countless chances to act with integrity. He didn't take them. Now, accountability, not her, delivered justice. The Judicial Council launched an inquiry into the original judge's conduct, reviewing cases where bias or favoritism might have influenced rulings. Colleagues who once respected him now questioned impartiality. His association with Charles, the golf outings, shared investments, and social ties became potential conflicts of interest. He wasn't criminally charged, but he faced suspension, loss of reputation, and possible retirement under scrutiny. She didn't seek to ruin him, she simply exposed the truth. His pale face that day in court wasn't fear of her, it was fear of accountability. It served as a reminder that power misused eventually faces consequences, even without dramatic punishment. With the settlement reversed, assets restored, and fraudulent accounts uncovered, she finally secured full financial independence. She invested wisely, diversified holdings, and appointed a trusted advisor. For the first time in decades, her financial security wasn't tied to anyone else's approval or control. She didn't measure independence by wealth alone, but by the freedom to make choices without intimidation. She purchased a modest lakeside home, started a consulting business for women entrepreneurs, and built a future anchored in self-respect. She didn't rise to prove him wrong, she rose to reclaim herself. Her children struggled with conflicting emotions, love for their father, respect for their mother, and confusion over the revelations. Gradually, evidence eroded denial. They apologized, acknowledging they had believed narratives shaped by charm and authority rather than truth. She didn't demand loyalty, she encouraged reflection. Reconciliation became a slow process based on accountability rather than blind allegiance. Family dinners resumed quietly with careful conversation and honest questions. The goal wasn't to choose sides, it was to rebuild trust with both clarity and boundaries. When Charles requested a meeting, she listened. He apologized, shallow at first, then sincere as reality humbled him. She didn't offer immediate forgiveness. She explained that forgiveness isn't automatic, it requires effort, responsibility, and change. She set boundaries, no financial dependence, no manipulation, no rewriting of history. She wished him well, hoping he would reflect and grow, but she refused reconciliation. Closure didn't require reunion. It required respect for herself and the truth she fought for. She let go of bitterness, but not memory. Rather than bask in personal victory, she redirected energy toward others. She launched a foundation offering legal and financial support to older women facing divorce, coercion, and asset manipulation. Her story became a beacon, proof that resilience, documentation, and strategy can overcome bias. She didn't preach revenge, she promoted empowerment. Workshops, scholarships, and advocacy programs grew. She found fulfillment not in wealth but in impact. Her legacy became service, not retaliation. On a quiet afternoon, she revisited the courthouse, not as a litigant, but as a witness to how far she'd come. She sat on the bench outside, the place where she once trembled with fear, and allowed herself a moment of reflection. She realized victory wasn't the judge turning pale or the courtroom shock, it was reclaiming dignity, voice, and autonomy. She didn't need to destroy anyone to rise. She needed only to stand in truth. Closure arrived not in triumph over others, but in peace with herself. Her story ended not with vengeance, but with power earned through resilience and integrity.